What's up, everyone? It's Dave with K-Dubb Productions here. So today I just want to talk real quickly about how to track with plugins inside Reaper and how to monitor PDC and really what you should be what you should be trying to achieve with your recording templates in your process. So I disclaimer: I do not know the technicality and the technical details of plugin delay compensation, otherwise known as PDC. But I do know enough to get me in trouble and, hopefully to get me out of trouble as well. So I have in front of you, this is my recording template for recording vocals over beats. I typically have a 2-track beat, it's already kind of mixed, as that's what the client brings, and then I have a track that I record their vocals on, and then this track I can duplicate it. I often do for all the various layers, the various sections, and etc., etc. So that's basically, I'm not going to go over my whole template here, but I do want to point out some important things. They're important for me, and I think they will be important for you. That's with the assumption that, one, you are recording audio, not MIDI. This, because I don't record, I do record MIDI, but this is not necessarily for MIDI. This is for recording audio, so maybe you're recording vocals like I am, or maybe you're recording guitar or full kits or anything like that. So that it will apply to that more than anything else. And also, this is going to be for those who are who already do, are wanting to, or thinking about monitoring through Reaper, and not necessarily monitoring through your interface. You might have direct monitoring or something like that. This is not that. That's something entirely different. I'm monitoring through Reaper because I want the plugins, I want the sound to come through. I kind of want to get an early start on the mix process, if you will, okay? So that's the perspective I'm coming from, and that's what we're going to start with here. So Reaper has a very useful, I know Cakewalk does not have it like this, and I know Cubase is not as, well, at least the previous versions were not as detailed as this performance meter. This is, you can get to this by Control Alt and P on the PC. I don't know what it is on the Mac, but Control Alt P, and it toggles this. This is actually in my screen set. I have it on another screen next to the track manager. That's how important it is for me to see this and to monitor it. So you're going to see a couple of things. You're going to see the total CPU, and you're going to see real-time CPU. It's going to show it on a graph, a line graph, and it also show a meter here. And then you've got some other things: disk read and write, RAM. RAM is really useful when you're to monitor if you're doing recording MIDI and using VSTs and that kind of thing for general audio mixing. I'd never, ever even come remotely close to it being a problem. Okay, and then under that you've got your total CPU from the effects, and then I love this, that you actually can see for every single track, and let's actually bring this out because it's got some good information. You can see, actually it wasn't that much, but you can see for every track it will tell you the CPU usage, the number of plugins, and the total PDC. Okay, right now, there's nothing happening. I'm not pushing play. There's nothing happening, but you can see I've got 51 effects enabled here. And not so much, so I just tested. It's not so much enabled, but I do have 51 effects loaded. I have probably 6 of them disabled. So I have 45 effects that are enabled right now. And I have no usage because there's no audio running through. So let's push play and see what happens. We push play, we see our total CPU goes up a little bit because something's happening, right? And then you can see the metering. The metering is not important. I'm not really going to talk about all the stuff going on. I really want to focus on the performance meter. Okay, so now let's record enable my audio track. I've got, some plugins on there. I'll go over that in a minute. But as soon as I record enable that, you see it jumps up. It jumps up a lot. It was at 2, now it's at 17. And that's because, I don't know exactly the reason, but we know that we're going to have audio come through this track in real time. So that is the most important thing in this meter when you're tracking, is the real-time CPU usage. Because when you're recording and you have record enabled on any tracks, the more tracks you have record enabled, this will go up. It does not go up in linearly. So when I add another one here, it will not go up. It will not be double this. Okay, Control D. It will not double. It just goes up a little bit, right? And if I do another one, it will go up, but not necessarily linearly. Okay. Let's get rid of those. So you understand how that works. Real-time CPU is related to record enabled because we're recording in real time. All right. And the other thing you'll see is that now that I've record enabled, also the CPU usage for the effects has also started to populate here. Whereas previously it was at nothing. And now when we record enable, it goes up. So the two are related. All right. But even though I've got CPU usage here, and you can see it also in this column here, if you click on a track, you can sort it by ascending or descending. Okay, so that's pretty good. And we can see that if I sort them that way, that this is the highest CPU usage for the audio tracks. Okay, now let's go back to where we were. What we also see is that there's 0 PDC, okay, 0 plug-in delay compensation, and that is the very special key to this. You need to make sure that whatever plugins you're using while tracking are 0 PDC. Now you can get away with some. It all depends on what your buffer settings are. Okay, your buffer settings can be found up here in the top corner, or you can click on when you click on it, that's what happens. I have it set to 128, that's for mixing. Typically I'm at 64 when I'm tracking. This is not set up for low latency, that's a disclaimer. Not for this session. I didn't change it before I did this, so I'm sorry. Because what happens is this template, once the recording session is done, it then becomes my mix template. And maybe I'll do a video on how this template is really set up. But for now, let's just focus on 0 PDC, all right? And if I have a bunch of these tracks here, okay, they're all record enabled, they're gonna be 0 PDC. And if I just start recording them right now, you will see that real-time CPU is up, but it's not detrimental to my system. It's manageable. That's 7, 8 tracks armed and recording through a number of effects. Now we're at 79 effects, and I mean at the end of a tracking session, this is, I might have 10, 15, 20 of these audio tracks, all with the effects. I might be up in the 130, 140, 150. A big project will be 200, and I'm still tracking. At that point, you're going to start to see some higher usage of everything, and you're going to want to monitor it and keep watch of it and make sure that you're not crippling anything. But that's the whole point of this, is to be able to monitor it and to know what you're looking for. So while I'm tracking, I'm still 0 PDC. And so, okay, let's keep that in mind, okay? Because it's the real-time CPU usage and the PDC that are the most important. Aside from latency, I'm not here to talk about latency. It's related, but it's independent of what you can do inside Reaper for the most part. Latency has to do with your interface and the drivers and almost, I mean, yeah, your buffer settings and sample rate, but again, that has nothing to do with Reaper, okay? And there's nothing you can really do inside. I mean, there are some tweaks, but again, this is not that, all right? So I talked about real-time CPU usage. I talked about PDC, how we can view it per track. Now let's take it a step further, because PDC is per track is directly related to the plugins that you're using, okay? So if we take a look at this template here, and I don't even know why I'm still recording, but I'm letting you know that I'm doing all this, and you'll see some activity on the meter here. I can turn up the headphones in the booth, and you'll see that's sorry, that's the headphones. They're on in the booth. I just turned them up, which will feed back into everything there. Let's turn those off. Okay, so let's go back to where we were at record enable. Now everything's kind of back to where we were as we're kind of mock tracking. We're mock tracking right now. Because even when I start recording, this doesn't go up very much, but you'll start to see disk read and write, obviously, but that's about it. As soon as I undo record, the only thing that really changes is the disk. I mean, obviously read, but we're not writing to disk anymore. Some of the CPU usage from the effects goes down as well. And kind of as we would expect. Now, taking this a step further about the plugins, you need to make sure that whatever plugins you're using are zero latency. There are two things about plugins that companies will market. They will be low CPU usage, or they will be zero latency. But the two they can be mutually exclusive. You can have a low latency plugin that uses a lot of CPU, so you need to be careful of that. And you can have a low CPU plugin that has PDC. Okay, so PDC meaning latency. I say latency and up here, that's not the latency. I mean latency in the plugin. Okay, the plugin is in the plugin delay compensation. That's why it's called PDC, because the plugin is going to introduce latency. The latency is measured in samples, just like your sample buffer. Okay, and so just some quick math. Okay, if I'm tracking at 64 samples, it says 128, but I normally track at 64 samples. Now, I can have 64 samples of PDC and still be, I guess, zero latency, because I'm using only one buffer's worth of plugin delay compensation. So it's kind of the same thing. Maybe you can quote me. If I'm wrong, please tell me. I know people get away with doing that stuff, but I'm here to tell you, don't do that. Go for zero PDC. Okay. Now let me show you what I mean. All right. I have stuff. All right. For instance, I have a reinsert that goes to my 500 series rack for some processing outside of the box. Okay. When I enable that on this track here, watch what happens. Okay, this is just reinsert, and this is just going to be the latency. Boom! Look at that. That goes up a lot. Okay, and I cannot track like that. I absolutely cannot record with that kind of latency. If I'm on the mix track and I turn on ozone. This is the vintage EQ. Sometimes I like this during the mix stage. That's 128. I might be able to, it's not a lot, but it's something, okay? And I think that if I have this and I have maybe some other stuff, I don't think it adds. I don't think you go 128 plus 51. I think it is the highest common denominator in this case. So whatever the highest number is, that is your total plug-in delay compensation, and everything will fit as long as it's within that. Meaning the 128 is going to be insignificant compared to the 5,000 something. Okay. Now, let's go even further, because I will, if you open up the effects rack here, you can actually see, it might be down here at the bottom for you. I have mine up here. You can see per plugin what is the, okay, so if we look, you have the CPU usage, and you have the samples of latency. It's not real defined here in terms of separating, but I have for this little plugin here, this is a great little plugin, by the way, 0 CPU usage out of a total 0.2% for the whole effects rack here, and 0 samples out of 0 samples, meaning this whole effects rack is 0 samples of latency, and it's only 2.2% CPU usage out of this whatever. Okay, so re-EQ is, as you would expect, 0 out of the CPU and 0 samples. I have 0 samples total, but the 0.2%, 0.1 comes from the de-esser from Air Windows, okay? And then another 0.1 comes from, it was a little spike there, comes from the virtual mix rack. The virtual mix rack, I recommend this. I have a video about plugin subscriptions, and this is one of the reasons that makes this, not only does it sound, I mean, it sounds good. You've got all this stuff in here that you can use. A lot of it sounds really good, but it's low CPU usage and it's 0 latency. I mean, you can't get that. You can't get better than that. Okay, so that's how you can check for your whole plugin chain there. Okay, now let's go over to the mix rack, or sorry, the mix bus, and I have a bus compressor there. You'll see it's low CPU and 0 latency. I have the tape simulator from Air Windows, low CPU, 0 latency. If I enable this, my CPU usage, it basically doubles for that whole track, and my samples now. Now you see, here's the thing about, I told you that your sample buffer is like a chunk, and if it fits in that chunk, it's still an entire chunk. And so in this case, it's only 22 samples of latency. I could probably get away with it at a 64 sample buffer, but in this case, it's going to take the whole 128 chunk, even at just 22 samples. Again, I'm going for 0 latency, so I don't have that enabled while I'm tracking. And by disabling it here like this, or shift click, does the same thing, you can just get rid of that PDC. All right. So if you're having issues tracking, this is or you want more out of your tracking, right? So maybe I want to start while somebody's tracking. I want to hear what the reverb sounds like. So I turn the reverb up, right? I can do that and not ruin the recording. I can do that while I'm tracking and not get any glitches or anything. And the client, the artist, doesn't hear anything. They just hear, the reverb being turned up. Okay. Because I want to come over to the master track, and I'll show you. I've got the tape machines. Now watch what happens with this. I don't even need to see the whole list there, because we have it for the effects chain per track. This goes up by a lot of samples. Now that is a lot of samples, and it is impossible to track with that plugin. And even the limiter, I cannot track with a limiter. That's 384 samples right off the bat. Well, that's pretty much all I needed to cover today, just to kind of show you how to look out for PDC, and just a reminder, go for zero latency, zero PDC. Find the plugins that do that. A lot of the Reaper plugins are zero latency. Air Windows plugins, Kilohertz is another one that has a lot of zero latency plugins. So like the delay. Things like pitch, very hard to find a zero latency plugin. What am I thinking of? Auto-tune. The only one that is going to be zero latency is the one from Waves, and it's not that great. So you might use it just to kind of get the effect, but then you have to swap it out later because it's just terrible. You know what is cool that is zero latency is Ovox, but it's not easy on the CPU. So they go hand in hand, all right? CPU usage and zero latency. Now they might be totally mutually exclusive, but usually it's one or the other. It's rare to find some that are both zero latency and low CPU. So just keep that in mind. Try to use plugins. There are some good plugins out there. I mean, this one, Front Daw, is a great like saturator like a non-linear summer, like the Waves NLS, which used to be on my channel strip here, but it is it's got latency, and I can't have it in my recording template. So find them that are zero latency and monitor that. You can always, when you're done tracking, you can always go back and just start throwing on your heavy hitters, and you can always disable them, or you can freeze tracks. But remember this, if you can find plugins that you're good with, that you understand how to use, whether or not they quote unquote sound good is a whole different debate. But if you are comfortable with using them and they are zero latency, use them in your mixing. So then as these tracks build up, now you've got your recording template then becomes your mix template, and you can really just take that further and continue mixing, now your overhead is going to be so much lower. It means that you're going to spend less time having to find where you're popping and crackling and all of that. You're going to have less freezing and unfreezing things that you need to do. It's just going to speed up your workflow. So yes, this is for tracking, but man, this really translates to so much more. So I highly recommend that you invest. And the thing is, you often don't have to. The expensive plugins are so heavy on PDC or CPU usage that it really benefits you to find the cheap, the free stuff. Do your research. Ask the developers if they don't state specifically. Ask them, or just look at the reviews and give it a try. I think you'll be happy. I think you'll find that your workflow will increase. Your CPU overhead or headroom, in that sense, not audio headroom, but headroom for your CPU is going to improve, which means you can mix bigger projects. It doesn't matter. I mean, yes, it matters. This scales with the horsepower of your PC or Mac or whatever you're using. It scales with that, but whatever tier you're at, you can use this to your advantage. I promise you, it will help you. So that's it. That's all I wanted to cover today. So I hope it was helpful for you. I've got some other videos where I talk about other stuff, so check them out. Feel free to hit the like button and hit the subscribe, and let me know what you think. Later.